I'm here with our guests, Debar and Clint Russell. We brought them in today to talk about the border issue. Now, listen, guys, I know we've been talking about this quite a bit, and it's not really something that independent media talks about on a regular basis. However, this particular show, when I started it, we made this comment that we wanted to get across to normies, to the everyday people, the people who weren't necessarily watching independent media like ours. When you watch a Clint Russell show, when you listen to Debar, sometimes it can go over your head, right? Because they're very nuanced and they're talking about actual foreign policy, which they have a lot of knowledge of. Unfortunately, the mainstream and the public doesn't have a lot of knowledge about what's going on. However, on their mainstream media networks like Fox and Newsmax, when you talk about the conservative side, they show the border this, the border crisis. We had on Anya Parampel the other day to talk about it. We brought back Clint Russell and Debar to talk more about this. I plan to talk about the border issue every single show if I can, because it is the number one issue on the Republican side, especially the populist Trump supporter. By far, easily, it's the number one issue. In fact, they were going to start to protest what's going on with the invasion, they say. However, we have different opinions about it, and people like Debar and myself actually go down to Latin America and see the bases that are down there. I said before the other day on Peter Lavelle's show, you can't close the border until you close the bases. So we'll get into that, but there's this interesting situation that's taking place in Tejas, which is Texas, right? Where they're arming up themselves, let's go, to defend their border themselves from the invasions, because you do have this rhetoric from Donald Trump. We don't know who's coming in. They're sending us their worst. So much drugs flowing over the border. Like I said, politically, I think he's very smart because he's kind of comparing it to the Cuban Muriel boat ride in which they claim that Fidel Castro emptied his jails, emptied his mental institutions, and he sent them everybody here to the United States. If you ever watched Scarface, they were holding people in these encampments. And I saw this when I first moved to Florida under I-95, these actual camps where they were holding people because they didn't know who was coming in. That's not the case, in my personal opinion, when you see what happens across the border. Yes, we don't know everybody who's coming in. There are a lot of undocumented workers, but we understand that a lot of the people, most of the people who are coming in, are just coming to find a better life. And like a lot of times, they're coming because we have occupied their land and they're following their shit here. And like Don said the other day, they're just hoping for some trickle down when they get here. So I want to talk about this topic every single day. A lot of times conservatives have a hard time talking to Don because, you know, we kind of bring up these facts that can't be avoided. The fact that we have 100 bases down in Latin America and we're actually stealing their resources. So if we weren't occupying their land, maybe they wouldn't come here. However, the situation with Texas is very, very interesting. Don, why don't you give us your opinions about what's going on there in Texas, and then we'll play the video, please.
For about 1,000 different reasons, we're living in a very dangerous period. And there are, as I mentioned earlier, many spots where just one little match could ignite a massive fire. The Texas border, okay, the country is evenly divided between these two groups. One of the dividing issues between them is the issue, it's referred to as the immigration issue. The actual factual basis of disagreement between the two sides is very murky at best, but it's massaged all day long by the media. People have very strong feelings about it, even if they lack very much actual information about it. The context, though, is that you have two groups of people that are very angry over the immigration issue, and there are two political factions in the government, particularly in the Congress, and also among the state governments, that are looking at basically closing the border or continuing the status quo, which means essentially an open border. We're talking about the border with Mexico. And for some context, the border's not open for everyone. If I were to go out of the country and then come back and leave my passport somewhere, I would not be escorted to New York or some other city by the Border Patrol or the FBI or whomever. I'd be waiting until I could prove that I belonged in the country. There's a policy of admitting people that are coming in the southern border that is so obvious that even Democratic mayors and governors are, protesting the existing policy, even knowing that it's going to cost them that perhaps their political careers. The discussion, you have people, truckers, and now state militias that are going to the Texas border in defiance of the Supreme Court's decision interpreting federal law on the matter. And when we talk about a state militia going, they're armed, and we have the open discussion of secession from the United States among the politicians in Texas and elsewhere. And there are 25 of the 50 states whose governors and or state officials are in concurrence with what's going on in Texas, and in concurrence with Florida's action to bring a military component to Texas. So depending on what the federal government does, we might end up seeing a shooting war like Fort Sumter in the Civil War, with the polarized population. The polarization you could practically map by looking at a federal election map, red and blue states, and didn't have half of the country secede in 1861. You might see that now. I mean, the preconditions are set up for this, as bizarre as it may seem. And if you look at how the U.S. government has behaved around the world, working, to its advantage at high cost in blood and treasure, these kinds of divisions in other countries around the world, Ukraine is the first of many that comes to mind, and the position that the U.S. has put Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and others in this hemisphere, and then Russia, China, and others, around the world. If there ends up being a shooting war around the Texas border, does the Mexican government suddenly seek redress for, return of some of their land? They were kicked out of Mexico, in California and New Mexico and Texas, etc., a lot more recently than anyone was ever kicked out of Palestine, 1,800 years ago or whatever. Do they reclaim California and all the territories that they lost in the Mexican War with the United States? Does Russia? Russia is already talking about, the head of the State Security Committee is talking about, why don't we put some missiles back in Cuba, since the United States has missiles right at our borders now? We have so many moving parts right now that all lead to like some massive conflagration, and it's happening from the inside now too. Yeah, and there's not, and where I was going before, who's the steady hand here to try to secure policy? We don't even know who they are. Biden is a figurehead. Obama was a figurehead too, by the way.
Yeah, curious, Clinton. Who do you think it is?
I don't know who it is.
Who does Clint think it is? I want to know what the libertarian thinks.
Oh. Who do I think what is? Sorry.
Who's really pulling the strings here?
Who's making policy?
Well, it depends on the policy we're talking about. Are you talking about the immigration policy?
Yeah.
Well, let's say immigration policy,
foreign policy,
geopolitical, foreign policy. Who's responsible for the wars in Israel and Ukraine? The situation between Russia and the United States, the situation between Russia and China, and the situation between Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and the United States, and the border. All of that is a mixture. And it was all brought to this position by somebody. You have any idea who that is? Because I'll be damned if I do. It ain't Biden.
Yeah, well, the neoconservative movement took over in the mid 1990s. They seem to have established most of our geopolitical maneuvering for the next 30 years, even though they're allegedly out of power. I mean, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and even Barack Obama were all basically in lockstep with all of those policies. Even though they didn't start as many wars as George Bush, it was still, continuation, much more drone strikes and limited war without congressional authorization. So I think that it's an ideological push from the neoconservative movement, which is now also the neoliberal movement has basically taken up that mantle. I think that AIPAC's influence on our political establishment is quite evident in terms of Middle East policy. It seems clear to me that the Israeli government wanted to see as much discord and chaos in all of the nations that don't like them, so that then they would be basically incapable of ever being a threat to Israel proper. So that seems to have been the policy when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. When it comes to China, Taiwan, I think that is more the financial imperative. They're trying to maintain kind of a global hegemonic control, defense of the U.S. dollar. I think that's more on behalf of the bankers of the world, the central bankers to be specific. And then our immigration policy, I think, is largely driven by the United Nations. And they, if you look at what happened to European immigration policy and the migrant crisis that they've been dealing with for the past decade, it looks like a time portal into our near future, if not our now. So I think that we're being ruled by people that don't have really any concern for the domestic population whatsoever.
Let's stick with foreign. Go ahead, Don. Did you want to say something before?
So I mean, what you said, I don't agree or disagree, by the way, but it's pretty plausible. You're saying, in essence, you've got a number of different interests that are being expressed. The central bankers' interest being expressed, say Taiwan, China area, someone else here and someone else there. So so I would assume that the president's job or the executive's job or the executive plus Congress's job is to sort of mediate those interests, kind of harmonize them in a way that comes out, without, say, nuclear war on the other end.
Yeah.
What do you see as the prospects for that? Like, who's got that job out of the available players?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't think that they necessarily think big picture very often. It's quite clear to me that the Biden administration has actually been attempting to diffuse, despite the strikes that they just launched today. They have been trying to diffuse the potential for a direct war with Iran. It was reported, it hasn't been verified, but I think it's quite plausible that it was back channel communications between the Biden administration, probably Blinken, and the Iranian leadership. And they were saying, hey, we've now said that you killed 3 of our troops. We have to strike you just to save face. We're going to do so. Don't fight back. And then this thing can simmer down. And the Iranians told them to shove it up their ass. They said absolutely not. So I think this is why they then opted to strike allegedly IRGC or Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, because they knew that if they were to strike Iran directly, Iran would probably enter the fray against Israel, and I don't think they want that either. So that's my read of it.
Let's take a look at this video real quickly and then talk a little bit more about this subject too as well, because you said the UN is controlling, Clint. Your opinion is that the UN is controlling a lot of the immigration policy, right?
I think so. And NGOs, yeah.
Okay. Well, you did spend a lot of time with Vivek Ramaswamy just recently, and Vivek Ramaswamy kind of floated this whole replacement theory, which your tweet today, number 7 in particular, if you want to go back and look at it, I had problems with it. I had an issue with it because, once again, immigrants don't vote en masse. They don't. And so for them to come into this country in exchange for a vote and to look at our electoral problems, because I believe elections is the way we fix this. The only way we can fix this is if we can fire somebody who's doing an awful job. If somebody like Nikki Haley is working for Raytheon and Boeing, same thing with Lindsey Graham or Mitch McConnell, the only way we can fix this is if we have a mechanism to fire them. And that's what elections are supposed to be for. Too much of the blame is getting put on immigrants when it comes to their problems with our elections. And that's the big problem we have to talk about right now as well, because I think there's a misconception that these immigrants are automatically going to vote Democrat anyways. They're not going to. A lot of these immigrants that come across the border are very much pro, I don't want to say pro, but they're very Christian. They're Catholic, right? So they're not really down with the stances for the left when it comes to abortion, when it comes to the LGBTQ community. You know what I'm saying? They're not there on it. So I don't think it's just easy to say that they're going to be Democrats and vote Democrats and change the whole electoral map. Before I go to the video, I'm going to give you your shot at this. Yeah. You did say at number 7 today, right, that the electoral process has changed via immigration. Your number 7?
Specifically, I said make electoral remedies impossible via mass migrant amnesty. So the key there is amnesty, and this is essentially what happened under Ronald Reagan, is that you had millions of illegal immigrants that then became citizens, and those people absolutely do vote. And if I'm a California native, so
where do you have that data? Where do you have that data?
Which data?
The data that they vote. Because I will even tell you the ones that do become citizens, a lot of them don't vote. Well, right? Sure, I've never seen data once come to me. I've never seen data once come to me and say that an election was overturned because illegal immigrants were voting.
Okay. Well, let me just give you, basically, it's anecdotal, but I think you can view it as empirical. Look at what happened to California. California is now one of the hardest blue states. It was a red state in the 1980s. So, do you think that had nothing to do with immigration? I'm not saying it had everything to do with it, but to say it wasn't a factor, I think is not true.
Well, Don, you want to jump in there and say something, because I have a lot to say. But I mean, I can tell you that California, even though it has a lot of immigrants, most of the immigrants don't vote once again. And a lot of the immigrants that came into the country, they become the Marco Rubios and the Ted Cruzes. They're actually more against what they call illegal immigration or undocumented workers coming in than the actual, you know what I'm saying, than the leftists themselves. So even though that California might have been a red state once or twice, it has been predominantly blue because of the culture war issues, right? The LGBTQ issues. And you talk to a lot of Californians, they think it's okay to go to war with Russia because Vladimir Putin is anti-LGBT, right? So yeah. I don't see the coalition there. And once again, we don't have data that shows that illegal immigrants vote. But I want Don to throw his opinion in real quick.
I didn't say illegal. I said the amnesty for the Mexican, or not Mexican, but just the entire immigrant class from the 1980s. There was millions that became citizens. Those people have the right to vote.
How do you know that they voted Democrat? I just gave you an example of them being hardcore Christians and not going along with the culture war issues. We don't know that. What I'm saying is that there's no data to back this whatsoever.
See, this is kind of a binary view that I think is the mistake here. What I'm not saying necessarily that they're going to just inculcate Democrat power. I'm saying that their priorities as immigrants, they do not have the same level of values for the Bill of Rights. Most Republican voters don't have values for the Bill of Rights either. My concern is about, do you value gun rights? Do you value speech rights, press rights? Like these are the things that I care about as a libertarian. Many of these first-generation immigrants, because they come from a culture that does not have those rights, inculcated in their civilization, they come over here and then they have a politician that gets up on the campaign trail and they talk about banning AR-15s and they say, I don't give a shit, do it. That's not my concern. My concern is, whatever their concerns are. You're absolutely right. Many of them are Catholics, but it is also true that I think it's 70% of first-generation immigrants do lean Democrat, because they come from a financially more impoverished place. As you said, second, third, fourth generation, they start to shift more conservative. Again, not my concern, though. I don't believe that we'll see remedies through the GOP or the Democratic Party. I just want to have people that are voting that actually care about the Bill of Rights, because that's what I care about.
Don?
So the Orthodox view is that, and I think it's... I think calling it anecdotal in this particular case would be generous. I think perhaps the made-up bullshit view from the media is that they vote Democratic, and that this is the motivation for Democrats opening the border, that they think this is going to keep them in office. I understand the sentiment. It rests on a few faulty assumptions. First of all, is the assumption that just because people go into the voting booth and pull a blue lever means that a blue vote is going to come out the other end. I'm not so sure of that part. So whatever the intentions of the people going in, I'm not certain that their vote gets expressed in a way that is at odds with someone who made a decision already how the vote's going to come out. So it's kind of surplusage to bother to do that unless, having these new faces and this narrative that they're going to vote Democratic means if you rig the vote in favor of Democratic candidates, it's going to make sense to observers. So maybe as a prop, that whole idea is out there. And then the question is, does voting for anyone have anything to do with a change in policy? If you elect Democrats because I was once an illegal immigrant and they showed humaneness or some, other crap that they're selling towards me and my kind, I'm going to vote for them, expecting that will bring a more benign and humane policy to fruition. There are fault lines all along that track. From the beginning, how you vote is going to have nothing to do with what the vote that gets counted. If you elect somebody and they promise to do this particular thing, that has nothing to do with what they actually are going to do when they get into office. And in terms of making policy, no matter what they intend to do, if the policy has been decided to be this on immigration, then that's what it's going to be. The things that I think really drive it are economics and not politics. Politics are basically the rope or the reins that steer this beast. But the beast being economics, the theft and management of the resources of so-called third world or non-aligned nations, the global South, however you want to characterize it, Central and South America and the Caribbean here, and the other places where immigrants are coming to the United States, also from Africa, Asia, elsewhere. The problem again being the super exploitation of those places and the conduct of war and all kinds of horrors that enable the theft of those resources. This kind of common sense thing that if somebody breaks into my house and steals my TV, I'm going to go to their house to get it back. That's where it is. And so as we strip the world of its resources, a lot of the people are going to find their way here to either use them here or try to bring them back to their homes. So it may be that there's some people in Washington who think that if they let in this group of immigrants or that group of immigrants, that it's going to help me and my kind get reelected. But the only way I believe that would happen would be, as I said, as a prop, basically, for here's a vote theft scam. The narrative is these new immigrants came in because the Democrats had a more favorable policy. They're voting for Democrats. All the polls showed that Republicans should win, but the Democrats won. That's why.
Yeah. I think that the big issue is that when we look at these things, it takes away heavily from the actual problem, right? And that's who is kind of leaning on these elections. And I've said it from the get-go, it's the establishment. And the establishment doesn't have a red jacket or a blue jacket. It's across the board. It's kabuki theater. So we understand that. And first off, I want to ask Clint how he feels about what me and Don, what we were talking to as far as like when Don said, when somebody comes into your house and steals your TV, you can go to their house and steal their TV. Would you agree as an anti-interventionist libertarian that a lot of the problems that we have with immigration coming to the United States is the fact that our foreign policy is the actual driver of the migration and the trek to the southern border? Would you at least agree on that?
Yeah, I didn't disagree with almost anything Don said. So I agree with the vast majority of it. And obviously our foreign policy and not even our military, but sometimes just the NGOs that we fund or the coups that we plan surreptitiously. It has sowed discord in much of these South American, Latin American countries, and yeah, I mean that's a big driving factor as to why their economic system doesn't function. Then they flee. I mean, they're genuinely economic migrants, and they come to America because they've been told that America has, the most land of opportunity. I'm not so sure it is anymore, but that's the false advertising that the rest of the world's receiving. So I think that would be the best solution, obviously, is to stop toppling foreign governments and to withdraw from the rest of the world, both our military empire, but maybe even more importantly, our CIA influence ops that we run. But as to whether or not it's okay to come into my house and steal my TV because my government, blew up your home, the answer is no. I'm not responsible for the actions of my government. I have voted against them every step of the way. And even if I hadn't, it's still not moral because I didn't vote for these people to go and blow up your home. So it's a terrible moral conundrum. I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for the migrants, but it doesn't change the fact that I live here and my priority is to, my family, my offspring, my neighborhood, my town, my state, whatever. You got to keep it local. And if you have 4 or 5 million or 6 million or who knows how many, because they said there was 300,000 encounters just in Texas alone. That's not the only border state that we have in a single month. I mean, we're talking an astronomical figure. And you just simply cannot have a civilization that stays standing if you have this level of immigration. Just look at what's happening in Europe right now. It sows tremendous discord amongst the domestic population, and you're going to see that here. I mean, it's going to happen. So I'm hopeful that obviously the feds do not escalate things against Texas as they try and defend their border. But while saying that, it doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for the migrants. It's just that our system, and this is where we will all disagree with one another, our system is predicated on such a significant social safety net. Our economic model is so fascistic. We cannot integrate these people into our system without having tremendous financial issues, and not to mention the $34 trillion of debt, the fact that our interest payments alone on our debt is going to be 1.5 to 1.7 trillion over the next 12 months, which is more than our national defense budget, which is more than the 10 largest militaries on earth combined. We're up against it, financially. So you have to be pragmatic regardless of your sympathies for the migrants. That's my analysis on it.
Don, if you have an opinion on that, I'll let you go, because my issue is the fact that, Clint is a libertarian, right? And most libertarians are against foreign intervention. And, Ron Paul is the greatest example. That's when I started learning about the libertarian mindset as far as what blowback is concerned. But a lot of the populist right and the conservatives are okay with the Monroe Doctrine. They don't pay attention. And every time you talk to them about the bases that are there in Latin America, they don't give a damn. They don't realize that it's an occupation. Shouldn't they have some responsibilities that they have to pay for? Because they are okay with our government going into other people's houses and stealing their TVs, stealing their resources. Your thought on that?
I just want to go back because it went by before. Your image of, a guy in a red jacket and a guy in a blue jacket. Well, not really. There's a guy in just one guy with a one-color jacket that's in charge. I actually saw an image in my head when you said this of a guy, an organ grinder, wearing that, business suit with two monkeys, one with a red jacket and one with a blue jacket. And to me, I think that's more, a more accurate symbol of the way things really are. In other words, the politicians that are divided, in a virtual shit show in Washington, they're really in the employ of the folks who are really running the show. And it's their job to entertain us with their monkey antics or whatever.
Yep.
So we get to the point where we agree on what motivates people to cross borders and come here, whatever, or the things that are being done in their countries, including, I won't even say exclusively, but including a very heavy role played by the U.S. government and the U.S. corporations that own it. And then they come here, and it creates a problem for the people that are here, because, and I agree also that the condition of workers here and of the middle class here, the 4 or 5 guys that still constitute the middle class, has been so eroded that the additional strain on the system, the competition for jobs, the competition for housing, driving up housing costs, and all these other things, it exacerbates the condition of the people that are here already. The problem is that the same people that are destroying their environment, driving them out of their homes, on poverty draft or with actual shooting happening behind them, whatever, are the ones that have been depressing the conditions of workers in this country, certainly over the last 4 or 5 decades, with the imposition of austerity and the deunionization of the labor force, and the removal of all the different things that were earned benefits for people in this country, including things like Medicare and Social Security, which have been getting scaled back over time, which are actually our money invested, taxed, by workers and then invested in trust funds. The problem is that the same beneficiary is manipulating both sides, and we're supposed to fight over crumbs. And it may or may not be just for this person here to be wanting anything from that person there or whatever, but there's no solution to the problem unless one, A, recognizes the source of the problems in terms of systemic, role in creating the problem, and B, or two, whatever the frig I said, that this is how it's treated, that you and I are stand in the same relative position to this person who's benefiting from my misery and yours, and imposing the misery on each of us so they can benefit. In Marxian terms, or Marxist terms, they call it class solidarity. In military strategy, they call it not being a stupid ass. This guy with all this power here only has his power while we fight, and while we fight, he's picking our pockets. So we first have to fight him. And we have to, it's easy to say this in general terms, but we have to find ways to actually work together to address these problems. The people in this country need to be forcing our government to stop destroying other people's countries. And then the people that come to this country, understanding the misery that they're in, have to understand that the people they're looking at, despite the fear and crap that comes out of their mouth, really are not the enemy. That the people that drove you out of your country to come here and that are using you as a weapon against the other people that are here is the enemy. We have to agree that we have a common enemy and deal with that enemy. And until we do that, this shit's going to go on forever.
Let's play this video because I know we have limited time before we're here. I just want to play this video, get your guys' opinion, and get you on out. Take a listen to this. This is the border crisis in Texas.
Just more asylum seekers and illegal immigrants are now crossing the southern border in Arizona and California more than they do in Texas for the time being.
This is happening as a coalition of Republican governors prepares to head to the Texas border this weekend. Fox 4's Blake Hansen in now with more on the ramped up role of states in border defense. Blake.
Heather and Steve, more states this week have pledged to send manpower and other resources to the border. And while there is apparently progress in terms of Congress's plan to hatch out a border deal, there is some evidence that recent changes at the border might be having an impact.
You're the epicenter of this.
In Dripping Springs, west of Austin, the collective of people known as the Take Our Border Back convoy rallied Thursday. The group is traveling to the border for protests of the federal handling of the crisis.
I think this is something that we can kind of all agree on in some way. We are very for legal immigration. We want to welcome people into our country with open arms, but we do believe it should be legally. We think they are more than welcome. Just do it the right way.
The convoy is not the only group headed to Texas's southern border this weekend. Governor Greg Abbott announced he'll host 14 other Republican governors. It's as more red states vow support for the state of Texas's efforts, with the state essentially nudging out the federal government from areas like Shelby Park and Eagle Pass.
If Texas is helping to erect barriers, putting up razor wire, doing other things to keep illegal aliens out, I want to be helpful with them doing that.
A Customs and Border Protection source tells Fox News that crossings in the border sector, including Eagle Pass, dropped significantly from December to January. And a majority of crossings are now happening in Arizona and California, not Texas. In addition to Texas's hardened response, Mexico has increased its enforcement. Crossings do typically slow in colder months. Meanwhile, the problems caused by the border crisis continue to play out. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials announced an operation that rounded up non-U.S. citizens in 25 major cities who had been accused of serious crimes. Officials also confirmed a Daily Caller report that an al-Shabaab terrorist was released into the U.S. after crossing illegally and not caught for about a year.
Listen, we need more resources, and we're working to get that as hard as we can.
Some senators say that text of a border bill and Ukraine aid piece of legislation could be released as soon as tomorrow, with a test vote to happen possibly Wednesday of next week. That is despite House leadership, Republican House leadership, pouring cold water on the prospect of a deal.
President Biden traveled to Michigan Thursday for a campaign stop where he met with members of the United Auto.
I think it's skipping like crazy. Did we get that out? Was it skipping?
I could hear it. The video was like basically frozen for me.
Was it? Yeah, I saw a lot of that too as well. Let's hope that we get back over here. I think we are back. Okay. So who wants to take first crack at that? And before we get out of here, let's make your last comments on this, and then we'll wrap up the show. Don, go ahead. You go first. You're muted.
Him.
You're muted.
It's a really dangerous condition that we're facing, and we don't have anyone really managing it that has our interests at heart at all, and that is a very dangerous condition. Somehow we have to figure out a way of I mentioned this last time we spoke. One thing that I'm afraid of is that until we solve this problem in a holistic manner, then what we're going to be doing as we build this fence or rebuild this fence or whatever, which I'm not opposed to, by the way, I'm opposed only if it's done in isolation. What we want to do is build it for border control and management, like any sovereign state has the right to do, and for purposes that they decide upon inside that state, who to let in and out and under what conditions, and managing labor markets and all the other crap you got to manage, and security. But on the other hand, we don't want to be walling in the people who we're bombing the shit out of and stealing occupying their countries and stealing the resources and stuff, because we don't want to turn 600 million people in Central and South America and the Caribbean into one giant Gaza, where we're walling them in because somebody here, the same people that are picking our pockets, to put it gently, are intensively screwing them, and then we're helping to put up the barbed wire around them to keep them in. These are all human beings, everybody involved in this. And everybody has a sovereign right to manage their own affairs. And if what's motivating these other people to come here is the bad behavior of our government, it's our fucking obligation to put a leash on our government before we start shooting them or roping them in.
Yeah.
And that's my view of
it. And Clint, before you go, I will just say this much too as well, just to correct one thing. Well, obviously the election thing, I strongly disagree with you about. We can talk about that another time. We threw our opinion out there. I think before any immigration voting should even be put on the list of things to do, we have so many things that we have to worry about: ballot harvesting, proprietary software, mass mail outs, all that situation, which is really leading to the problems when it comes to elections in the United States. However, you did make one comment, and it was when you were talking about, well, you didn't vote for this. You've always pushed out against your government. Don just said it's our responsibility to kind of like bring in our government and say, hold them accountable for what they're doing foreign policy wise. They don't necessarily come here because they hear it's a better life for them. They come here because they're escaping a burning building from the conditions we cause and the dictators we stand behind, the CIA and the occupation down south. I will say that much. Your thoughts on what we were just talking about right now?
Well, I don't disagree. That was the opening part of my monologue, is that I completely agree. And it's not just Latin America. It's, basically the entirety of the Middle East, and it's also much of the rest of the world too. So yes, that would be a huge step in the right direction. That's kind of a first step. Really, if you want to get to the source of the issue, that is the source. The problem is that we don't have any political will, because our politicians don't fear us even remotely, to actually do what's necessary to stop that process. So the best we can hope for, from the domestic population's perspective, is to build a fucking wall. Like that's really
you
why
think it's going to work?
Well, I mean, prohibition never ultimately works, but it can certainly decrease the flow. And I think that's what they're probably going to have to do, just because the political pressure is building, or at least the pressure from the people is building, I should say, primarily. And the only reason that this is becoming a bipartisan issue is because these red state governors have been shipping these migrants into blue cities, and they're now having to deal with it. And they're like, oh shit, this is actually a problem. You're right. You send us 50,000 people in a couple months period. It's a real strain on our infrastructure, our system, whatever. So I think that it's going to be, like it or not, it's going to be one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue, in the coming election. And for that reason, I think it's very probable that Donald Trump will be the favorite to win. Whether or not the election is legitimate and he can actually ever step foot in the White House, I have no clue. But I think it's going to, put wind in his sails, so to speak, because the Biden administration has just absolutely laid down on this job, going so far as to threaten Texas, who's trying to, basically use their own sovereign state rights and defend their own people.
Don, any closing remarks before we get out of here? I think that was a great way to end the show.
Yeah, I agree. I think Clint is right. That is certainly how it's going to play out, because frankly, I just don't know how we make the U.S. government stop doing all this other shit that's driving people out in the first place. Maybe if they mitigate the flow in, and it mitigates the immediate damage on working people, will have an extra 10 minutes a day to think about what else is going on in the world and do something about it. I don't know. It seems to me, I just don't see any way out of any of this until there's like an entire collapse and a restructuring. I'm starting to get really pessimistic and a bit scared watching what's going on.
Yep. You and me both, brother.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing is that you saw the Soviet Union, right? A lot of them folding was because they had to try to pay for empire. Empire can be expensive. And I think with quantitative easing and kind of fudging the numbers in our monetary system, that's the only reason why we've gotten by. As we see the BRICS nations coming into play, and we see the Saudis willing to go away from the petrodollar, and our dollar starts to fall, it's going to be expensive to keep empire in place. I think if we look at it from a fiscal point of view, right, and that's something I was always wrong. I always said that, libertarians look at the fiscal side and the blowback. After meeting Clint and Reed and the guys we hung out with in D.C., they're all hard. They're compassionate young fellas themselves too as well. So, I think we can always highlight the suffering that's taking place because of our foreign policy, but we need to highlight the fiscal part, that it's expensive to keep these bases open. If you go to Honduras and you see right outside Tegucigalpa, the capital, an actual town, a base where there's like 1,500 troops, American troops. Hey, they're not the Boy Scouts there, ladies and gentlemen. They're there for one reason. And we know from when Manuel Zelaya joined ALBA, they removed his ass right away and put in Juan Orlando Hernandez. And, I was there for that election. The whole country just wanted this guy gone because they were going up in flames. And that was by our decision. And Donald Trump backed that election that Juan Orlando Hernandez won. The second election he had won, he was backed by Donald Trump. So Donald Trump really exacerbated the problem. He didn't help the problem. The great negotiator, and we know this, Donald Trump has sucked in Latin America, really trying to whack Maduro, putting Guaido in there, hiring
Bolton.
Elliot Abrams.
And Bolton. Yeah.
And Bolton. I mean, and labeling Cuba a state sponsor of terror with just a week out to go was just ridiculous. Clint Russell, Don Debar, I hope you guys come on the show often. This is my new show. I can't thank you guys enough. You know I love you. Let's get together soon. You in New York, my paisan, and you down there in South Florida. You guys have a great day. You guys can go check out their podcast, their work. They do amazing stuff out there. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thank you, guys. Clint.
Yeah, it's absolute pleasure as always, man. Liberty Lockdown's the show, and I also do a show with Luke Radowski over on thebestpoliticalshow.com. We go live 3 days a week. And last but not least, I am running for the vice presidency of the United States. Just announced a week ago under the Libertarian Party banner. So if anybody is interested,
who's the president?
We don't decide until May.
So you're just going to run as the vice president?
Yeah, because the delegates, there's 1,000 or so delegates that go to D.C. in May. They will decide. The first vote will be for the president, and then the second vote will be for the vice president. I don't have the time because I'm working so much to do the 50-state tour and get all the delegates to run for president. A lot of people are upset with me for that. So I was like, all right, I'll do the VP thing if you absolutely need me to. So obviously my goal is not to win, but to wake as many people up as possible. And I appreciate, shows like yours that allow me to get my voice out there and the message. And one final note, you guys absolutely ought to be hitting the conservatives. If you want to get them to talk about ending our empire, hit them on the fiscal stuff. You're right. They don't give a shit about the human suffering of people that they think are terrorists or whatever. You have to hit them on the fiscal side. That's how you actually get to them.
Yeah. And your voice is a very much needed voice out there, Clint. Not only do I consider you a colleague, but I consider you a good friend. And I am excited that you're running for the vice president. And let me tell you something. There are a lot of people mad at you, but you're not the only person they're mad at. Myself, this time, there's a couple guys. I mentioned them a lot on the show. That I was hoping would be running for president. They are not. Maybe you can put RFK on your ballot. What do you think about that, huh?
Well, Dave Smith had RFK on his show today. It won't be out till tomorrow, but I heard there was fireworks, so we'll see how that went.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people suspected that Dave Smith was not going to be where he is on his stance on Israel. So a lot of people are very proud when he came out with that and the way he kind of pushed back against RFK. I mean, he, Spike Cohen, and these are guys I respect a lot, said there's no way they're going to allow RFK to be on that ballot, be the top of the ticket yourself if he's going to have this stance on Israel-Palestine. Don, you want to say something before we get out of here?
Too early for me to look at that. I certainly completely disagree with everything he said about it, and I'm going to be completely silent in terms of what I think I'll be doing, a month out from the presidential election. There's a lot of possibilities. At the end of the day, I don't think whoever gets elected president is going to change a damn thing anyway, because if they threaten to change a damn thing, they'll end up getting a hole in their head.
I like Don.
Guys, we'll see you soon. Get on out of here, you knuckleheads. We love you. That is Don Debar and Clint Russell, Liberty Lockdown. They're out of here. It's time for them to go. YouTube still plays those crazy games where they like to unsubscribe people for whatever reason. I don't know if it's part of an algorithm or whatnot, but make sure you're subscribed and make sure you hit that bell and like, share, subscribe to the show. We're going to have this whole show clipped up. We're going to do it the same way we've been doing it on the Convo Couch for many years. We do a whole show, a live show, and then we have certain segments. We're going to repost the segments out there so you can share the shorter versions of the subjects that you like or that you want to share. And that's the most important thing you can do. A lot of us don't have any coin to spare, but we can share, right? That rhymed. We don't have any coin to spare, but we can share. So do me a favor and share.